And without further ado, I will hand it off to Jessie Handforth Kome, our presenter today, the Deputy Director of the Office of Block Grant Assistance.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm Jessie Handforth Kome, and I'm joined here today by 3 members of our National Disaster Resilience team that is helping us. I'd like you to hear each of their voices because they may end up answering some questions as we go along.
Hi, I'm Meg Barclay in the Office of Block Grant Assistance.
Jennifer Hilton and Lindsay Johnson with the Office of Economic Resilience.
Okay. We're going to just do a quick presentation walking you through some of the material that's in the NOFA, and then we're going to have an open question and answer session on the Phase 1 factors that are in the NOFA. Any questions that you have? We have a Phase 1 webinar that we just put out that I hope you've had a chance to view, but if you haven't, we're going to be showing you how to find it and where to get more information, and we're also going to visually demonstrate one of the most common questions that we're having from people that are having a little trouble finding things on grants.gov. So next slide. The purpose of the NOFA is just establishing familiarity with the content, making sure everybody's aware of all the little bits and pieces, or the major bits and pieces, and answer your Phase 1 questions that maybe you haven't had a chance to ask yet to resilientrecovery@hud.gov. If anything we say today doesn't comport with or conflicts or appears to conflict with the NOFA always prevails. So we're going to do our best, and we've all been reading the NOFA like crazy squirrels and getting up to speed, but if we don't get it exactly right, the NOFA is going to prevail, so I urge you to read the NOFA carefully. Okay, next. All right, NOFA contents. There is a kind of dizzying list of appendices to the NOFA and a whole nother notice that you have to look at in addition to the NOFA proper. The NOFA, which we're going to show you how to find, include a list of the applicable requirements of HUD's General Section NOFA, which covers administrative provisions related to all of HUD's competitive programs. Because this program is converted over from a formula program to competitive, not everything applies. So we created a list inside our NOFA of the applicable requirements of the General Section, but you're going to need to read the General Section to find those requirements. We didn't repeat them. Then we have a list of the appendices, and these are not in the NOFA proper for a variety of reasons. Appendix A is program and post-award requirements. It basically discusses what are the pieces of the CDBG regulations that HUD has already waived and what the post-award requirements will be. That'll help you aim your program, your proposal, in the right direction and understand what the post-award world is going to look like. Appendix B is the list of qualified counties. That's got a list of the most impacted and distressed areas. It's got that we named, the counties we already named in the formula allocations. But it also has a list of all of the qualified counties, all the counties that had declarations, and you can find out what they were declared for and the declaration number, which lets you look it up on FEMA's website. And we download that information from FEMA. We've already had one small error pointed out that we've corrected. And if you don't think the major declarations for your community are correct, let us know at resilientrecovery@hud.gov. Appendix C includes the partner letters, Phase 1 and Phase 2. It's a sample letter if you need to alter it because of local requirements. Be really careful to keep the binding language in, but if you need to add additional material, you can. Appendix D is only for use with Phase 2 when you actually have a project, and that'll be a partner agreement. And these are the terms that we're requiring in a partner agreement. Appendix E is Phase 2. It's instructions for requesting waivers, and I've been getting a lot of questions at resilientrecovery@hud.gov just in the last couple of days, really. You don't need to request waivers for Phase 1 because there isn't going to be funding in Phase 1. If you win Phase 1, you get an invitation to Phase 2 to lift a project out of your Phase 1 framing and propose it to HUD. At that point, the requirements like eligibility and national objectives and all the CDBG, the overall benefit, and the time frames all come into play. And there's instructions for requesting waivers on all of those things and the boundaries for what HUD can waive. Appendix F is your certification, so there's certs for Phase 1 and for Phase 2. And of course, certifications have to come in with your Phase 1 application. Appendix G, which we have another webinar on, is Phase 1 and Phase 2, most impacted and distress and unmet recovery needs, criteria, and instructions. And I imagine that some of you on this webinar have submitted for our 45-day courtesy review, the optional review of this threshold, and we are in the process of reviewing those submissions at this point. Again, that was, of course, an optional submission, but it's not optional to show that you meet these thresholds when you come in for Phase 1. Appendix H, if you get invited to Phase 2 and you propose a very large project, over $50 million total project cost with at least $10 million of CDBG-DR in it, you're going to be doing a benefit cost analysis. And we'll be doing a later webinar running through the benefit cost analysis guidance. I commend it to you right now because of Phase 1. It can be interesting to see what sort of outcomes and that we believe is of interest. What are the benefits that you could consider? Might spur ideas. Appendix I is a required form to submit for Phase 1 and Phase 2. It's your consultation summary, and we did a webinar on that already that you can find on the page that Meg's going to show you how to get to pretty soon. And Appendix J is what we're calling a crosswalk checklist, but in other NOFAs it's sometimes called a table of contents. So you'll submit this to show us what page number in your submission, your Phase 1 and then your Phase 2 submission, where the different pieces of the NOFA are so we can find them easily and make sure we don't miss anything and you don't miss anything. This can also be sort of your completeness checklist. Okay?
So just because we've had a lot of questions in the mailbox about how to find the complete NOFA and all of the appendices that Jessie just walked into, I'm going to show you how to get to that from the NDRC website. So one moment. And we are going to
show application.
Share application. So now we're looking at the NDRC main website on the HUD Exchange. And these are the instructions for getting to the full NOFA. So the first thing you're going to want to do is click this link. This takes you directly to the grants.gov webpage. You want to click Browse Agencies here on this tab. Go down and select Department of Housing and Urban Development. And here you see the National Disaster Resilience Competition. Click on that. You the announcement application package. Click on the Application Package tab. Oh, wait. And then Download. And it's going to ask you if you want to give it your email address. I'm just going to click No. And then you actually want to download application instruction. Even though you might want to download the package, but you want that instruction link.
You get the big zip file.
And this gives you a zip file, that's right, that has not only the it has the PDF with the whole description of the NOFA, and then you see all of these appendices that Jessie just discussed.
Including, it also gives you the general section with the technical corrections that were published. So this is the most up-to-date general section that applies. So
as Jessie mentioned, we also just did our posted a recorded webinar.
How do you want to share?
I'm going to show you how to get to the recording for the full webinar for the Phase 1 factors. I'm going to go back to HUD Exchange. Back to the NDRC website. And on the NDRC website, there's a link here under Training Materials to view upcoming NDRC webinars and access training material from previously held webinars. And you see here the NDRC NOFA Phase 1 Factors Q&A.
Which is this one.
Which is this one, sorry. Where's the Phase 1 Factors? Here it is, NDRC NOFA Phase 1 Factors. This is a pre-recorded webinar, and you can view the webinar materials, which is right now you can view the webinar itself and download the slides. So if you haven't viewed this webinar yet, recommend doing that. The recording is there. You can view it at your convenience. Going back to today's webinar, move on to the next slide.
Okay. I just want to bring your attention to a few other things that are in the NOFA, particularly for people that work normally in the CDBG or CDBG-DR world, because we did things a little bit differently. One is we had to define some terms, and for example, we defined the term tieback, which is used commonly in sort of field work around describing how an eligible activity or project ties back to the covered disaster, but HUD had never formally defined it before, and we did that here so that I could quit writing out the long 3-sentence description of how we usually describe it over and over again in the NOFA to simplify life. For those of you that are already CDBG-DR grantees, it's pretty much the same thing as being related to the covered disaster or tieback. Eligible activities are the same, but we do in Appendix E give you instructions on how to make requests for changes, an additional eligible activity category if you want that. But we did something that's unusual in CDBG terms. We added to the list of ineligible activities, and you should pay special attention to that. For example, temporary measures are ineligible. Levies that don't meet certain criteria are going to be ineligible. You need to pay attention to that going forward. We have, of course, thresholds that you have to get through to get into the competition. Most of those are related to statutory requirements. And HUD would normally weed those out in making a formula allocation and wouldn't allocate to anyone that wasn't meeting thresholds or deal with it in an action plan. In this case, we have to deal with it as helping you get into competition. The certifications are slightly different. They include a financial certification. You may want to fairly early on get your financial people involved so that they understand what's going to be involved in certifying that. If you already made the certification for CDBG-DR, this is a separate grant program. You will probably have to do it again. We're still debating whether you're going to have to submit all of the content you submitted or if we can just re-review the stuff you already gave us. Be real careful about the content and form of submission. When we get closer to the end of Phase 1, we'll do a webinar just on this. But you're going to have page limits for your narrative exhibits, and there's a lot of attachments that you can submit. Some of you have already mastered the optional attachment possibilities of Dropbox or Google Drive, but you want to take a look at that because we like maps and pretty pictures. Grants.gov, Meg just showed you basically all you need to know about grants.gov, but you will need to read the instructions very carefully for submitting your materials to grants.gov, and while you're planning your timeframes right now, because you have citizen participation at the end of Phase 1, you need to leave enough time to upload your materials to grants.gov. Because if you are late because you can't get it uploaded into grants.gov, that's on you. We are telling you now, start trying to upload your application materials early. It says it in the NOFA. Take a look at that. There are some funding restrictions and other submission requirements, and we definitely want you to take a look at those sections. They include some familiar things like civil rights and some unfamiliar things like design feasibility. And then we get to the NOFA Contents, which is the rating factors, which I can tell from the questions I'm getting that people have started reading and thinking about, but just don't want you to skip over the other material in the NOFA that could prevent you from submitting a successfully submitting an application. So we have now showed you everything and talked about all the things. We're up to questions. I'm hoping that we have some questions coming in from participants.
I haven't seen any questions come in through the Q&A, so maybe you
find out if we have anybody on the line.
Yeah, as Kathy mentioned before, you can go ahead and send any questions you have about Phase 1 factors in through the Q&A box that some of you are using to make sure that you can hear and see the webinar right now, so at least that part is clear. But you can also, we will go to the phones now, but please feel free to continue to, or start actually submitting any questions that you have in the Q&A box as well, and we'll just start queuing those up as well. So we could go ahead, Kathy, and take us to the phones.
There's like 60 of you out there, so somebody has to have a question.
And as a reminder, folks, if you want to answer a question on the phone, you can press *1 on your telephone keypad. Brian, do we have anybody on the phone?
And we don't have any questions via the phone lines at this time.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about one of our most common questions that we get a lot. And we have a fair number of counties that have been asking us whether they can apply. And the answer is, of course, that you can only apply if you are one of the eligible applicants that's listed. There's only 67 of them. So you're not, if you're one of the 67 eligible applicants, you're not applying on behalf of those counties. We're not asking you to be a pass-through. We're asking you to look at the qualified counties and decide which one's the most impacted and distressed, or which ones are the most impacted and distressed, and to apply, put together a proposal that covers those areas, plus any areas that, in additional, that you have leverage or a long-term commitment that can cover. And we want you to apply. If you're going to pass through the money afterwards, the only caution we have is that you, as the eligible applicant and potentially grantee, may not hand off to anyone any inherently governmental responsibilities for monitoring and administering the grant. And so HUD's relationship will be with the eligible applicant. And that be real careful about pass-through in your program design because the time limits on the money. Sure, it looks like we got a question.
We have another question. Can NDRC funds be used as a match with other federal dollars, or do they have to be standalone?
That's a good question. NDRC funds are CDBG funds. CDBG funds explicitly in our law are allowed to be a match for other federal grant programs as if they were local. But there is an important limitation, and that is for the Army Corps of Engineers projects, we have a statutory limitation that we cannot waive that allows only $250,000 of any form of CDBG disaster recovery assistance to be used in any one Army Corps Engineers project. Otherwise, there aren't limits. The CDBG-DR money does not lose its CDBG characteristics when it's used as match, and so it will bring in all the CDBG requirements to the activity along with the other federal program. That's been done quite often by other grantees, but you just need to be aware that you're going to be moving in Davis-Bacon, environmental review, and national objectives requirements into your project in particular. Those are the ones that we hear about the most.
So we have another request to talk about single-source procurement methods that could be used if a partner has been a part of the whole application process.
That's a great question. If you have a partner who comes with you, a for-profit partner specifically, because otherwise they wouldn't be subject to procurement under federal law, although some of you come from states where the state requires procurement regardless. HUD has granted the permission that's allowed to be granted under Part 85 to entitlement communities to allow single source selection or procurement afterwards. So you can basically say, you know, they're single source because they went through the competition with us, their capacity was scored along with us, there isn't anybody else like that, and you can then follow Part 85, it's 8536, or it's going to be replaced during the competition with the new regulations, but we'll get that out there when it happens. And you will, it just changes the reg site, not the requirements. And you will, you can single source them by just signing a regular procurement contract, but because you didn't compete it, you have to show in some ways that you have determined the reasonable cost, and a lot of times it's, you have to do a cost analysis before you make payments or set the dollar value of what you're going to pay them. You actually, most of you do some form of a cost analysis in advance for a large enough procurement, so the other kind of for-profit who might come in as a partner, you wouldn't have to procure anyway. They might be a co-funder with you. For example, if you have a lending institution come in as a co-funder, or a big developer sometimes will come in as a co-funder. In that case, we would expect you to have some form of written agreement to make sure that the whole project got done, but that's not necessarily a procurement situation. They're just investing in the same project you are, or you're investing in their project, or however it is that you explain it. I hope that answered that question. We're getting that one a lot. It's more of a Phase 2 question, although you need it for planning for Phase 1.
So another question is, when looking at the thresholds, do they have to focus on the census tracts specifically that meet the threshold, or can it be the whole county that the census tracts are within?
We said sub-county area. We didn't define whether it's census tract or place, although we prefer that form of data. If you have another form of data that doesn't have, you know, that isn't from the census, you can, you know, explain the place nature of that data. Surveys, we're getting a fair number of survey questions. But the question goes to a deeper thing that I'd like to, can we move on to the one of the extra slides that we have here, the graphics?
What was the name of the?
Is it pop through to any one of them will help here, but the first geography one. The geography the stakeholder one. Geography.
Stakeholder geography.
Here, stop right there. How does geography affect allowable costs? When you look at the Phase 1 webinar, this particular graphic is going to repeat a few times in slight variations. Geography affects allowable costs by, you have that in the center circle, or the smallest circle, you have the most impacted and distressed area with unmet recovery needs. This is the area that you have proposed that meets the threshold. It's a sub-county area, a group of areas that meet the threshold. The grant has a statutory requirement that we cannot waive that says that the only things that you can pay for, the only allowable costs, are the necessary expenses for disaster recovery and economic revitalization and affordable housing, and there's a couple other things listed there, restoration of infrastructure, in the most impacted and distressed areas. What we said, if you're already doing a recovery project with tieback, you can build it resiliently, and you can, that's also a necessary cost. So NOFA covers that and covers co-benefits, like if you want to meet other community development objectives. But there's points in the NOFA, significant points in both Phase 1 and Phase 2 for going to adjacent areas, so the whole rest of the county, a multi-county region, the state, or a multi-state region, using other resources, leverage. And I've got quite a few people who have told us that, you know, we have no money to put in this, and our answer is, you're not necessarily thinking the same way we are. Every day, every hour of every day, a very large amount of money in America is spent on infrastructure. without any regard for whether that infrastructure is resilient. If you find ways to take long-term commitments or to, up your game on not only on infrastructure, but on all your investments in these larger areas to improve resilience, then you may be able to get in and include some of that funding or as leverage or toward the long-term commitment factor. So we are not just looking, we are really looking at our funding as seed money. Because although $1 billion sounds like a lot of money in any one place, it's not a lot of money when it's shared around the country. We're looking at our funds as seed money, and it's a very un-CDBG way, really, although we have been gap financiers in a lot of projects, but we're just your starter money. We want to change how you invest in your regular everyday investments, and we know there's a lot of money out there, and the same with economic resilience and social resilience. So this is a challenge to think about our funding that you're applying for as seed money that can drive change in a larger geography. So did I pound that question into the ground, or is there more?
No, there is actually another question about match. This gets back to the matching question. Is federal transportation money excluded for match purposes? If so, could it be utilized to demonstrate project leverage?
This is an interesting question. Federal transportation money is not excluded for match purposes, provided you did not. We don't have match in this program, so you're asking the question in an interesting way, but CDBG can match federal transportation money, except you need to be careful that Section 3, our local hiring requirement, tangles with DOT requirements. So, and they don't allow it unless they grant a waiver, and I don't remember the waiver of what provision, but we'll get that posted up into the FAQs. That gets asked a lot in the main CDBG-DR program. If you are providing the CDBG-NDR, if you're proposing that CDBG-NDR funds that you're applying for are going to be matched to another federal program, we made a policy decision that we're not going to count that federal program as leverage in the leverage factor, but we definitely want you to talk about it if it helps you get to a bigger geography. Because the federal government just doesn't want to count match and leverage twice, even across agencies. But if you don't count the CDBG as match to the DOT program, but they're both co-funding a project, then you could count the DOT funding as in the leverage, or if it's just happening in the adjacent areas, it could possibly be what we're calling supporting leverage. It's supporting what you're doing, but you're going to fund the most impacted and distressed area, maybe DOT is funding the area next door. So there's several ways the answer could be yes on that.
So, oh wait, it looks like we just got another question, a couple other questions. Good. Okay. What resources are available to identify scientifically based evidence of climate change and its impact?
Your office's webpage. Climate change data. I'm going to let Lindsay try to tackle that. What are the resources available to identify scientifically based evidence of climate change and its impact? You should notice the ones, you must look at the ones that are referenced in the NOFA itself. So read the NOFA for those. I think we even provided links. That's just a starting place.
And then also on HUD Exchange, we do have a climate resource portal where we are uploading frequently new resources that are available on climate change and data. And as well
there is a link to that on the NDRC website, right underneath the link that we demonstrated to get to the webinars as well.
And the third piece of the answer is that you really need to look at the Rockefeller Foundation. They're calling each eligible applicant individually. They're calling the mayor or governor's office reaching out at the highest level they can, trying to invite people to participate in the Rockefeller Foundation technical assistance effort, and they will definitely try to connect you to all the resources that you need. Rockefeller is putting, I think, about $5 million into technical assistance during just phase 1 of the competition, so I would definitely urge you to talk to them about that. They're very, very good at connecting people to experts, and the last piece of it is that we're not just doing these technical webinars, we're doing topical webinars, and you definitely want to take a look at those, listen in on those for resources, and take down the names of the panelists and go follow them around, because other federal agencies are not covered by the HUD Reform Act. And so they can give you advice and guidance on a lot of things that we cannot.
Yeah, and with those topical webinars, we are listing all of the presenters' contact information on the slides, so make sure to flip through the actual slides for their contact information. And on the NDRC website that Meg showed earlier, there is a link to Rockefeller's NDRC website that you'll be able to use and for data on climate change and that stuff.
Yeah, and so I think that that'll be helpful. I believe that Rockefeller's even dividing their academies that'll happen in January by climate regions, so that you'll be able to talk to your peers and see what they're, that are dealing with similar climate change issues will be there with you. Another good reason to participate in the Rockefeller effort. Do we have another question?
Yeah, it's just a question. Can you talk more about other projects that would be eligible that aren't a covered project and how you meet BCA? Can these be large-scale planning and resilience program development?
This is language that's not really familiar to me, but I'll tell you what. If it's not a covered project, if it's not big enough to be a covered project, you don't have to have a BCA. If you want to do a benefit cost analysis for a smaller project, you can, but we're not requiring it because to us, the benefit cost ratio for how much effort it is to do benefit cost analysis just isn't there for a project that's smaller than what we set as the thresholds for a covered project. How you meet BCA is you need to read the instructions very carefully, and
they're in Appendix H.
They're in Appendix H, and we want to be clear that these are not like the FEMA or DOT BCAs where we didn't write into the NOFA that you must have a numeric ratio of 1 or greater. We are looking for you to demonstrate that the benefits are greater than the cost. If you, we want you to do your darndest to monetize everything and convert it into a mathematical ratio, but this is the first time we're trying BCAs seriously on the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant chassis, and CDBG can do a whole lot of things that don't monetize well. I mean, that when you look at the benefit cost analysis literature, it's like there's all these things that don't monetize well, and I'm going, oh yeah, but we can fund that and that and that and that. So what we did was we provided some room for you to give us information and not just monetizable data. But we really, really want every BCA to take a real swing at monetizing everything that you can monetize if you have reasonable data to support that. Meg, am I getting this all right?
Yeah.
Meg wrote it. I'm going to throw her under the bus. Come on, Meg.
No, that definitely covers it. So we also, I think it's important to note in those, and Jessie said this earlier, that the attachment sort of lays out examples of different kinds of benefits that could be considered within a benefit cost analysis, and that does go further than what might be accepted by a FEMA BCA or a Corps of Engineers BCA, and that obviously kind of helps you ramp up the B side of the BCA, right. But it also has to do with the nature of the CDBG program, and we're very interested in understanding a little more how grantees value those particular benefits as they relate to CDBG.
I mean, if we're looking at a project, just as a for example, if your proposal ends up being a very big economic development revolving loan fund, you're going to have a hard time, not an impossible time with BCA, because your normal, like the way you would think about it, is that you'd be underwriting every deal, so of course you'd have benefits, right? I mean, so you have to get through this. It's not, the models that we had to work with were all infrastructure models, or heavily infrastructure models, and we're aware that not everything in this, that CDBG could possibly fund has a set of data out there that you can do monetized on benefits. So we want you to work hard at it, and we are going to have help from our other federal agencies in reviewing them, as well as from our policy development and research people here. So cite your sources, you know, approach it as approach it as you know, get your geekiest people and approach it as a serious data problem, and benefit cost analysis again.
Right, and keeping in mind that the full BCA is a Phase 2 requirement. So we added, this is a kind of a techie question about how the NOFA is structured, but in the Phase 1 submission, certain thresholds have to be met, such as national objective and eligible activities based on your project. However, applicants are not required to submit projects in Phase 1. Please clarify.
Right. The reason that we included it on Phase 1 is because when we were brainstorming this and looking also at Rebuild by Design, we realized that some of the things that we got might conceivably be projects, although that's not what we're expecting. If your idea or concept doesn't know how you're going to meet a national objective yet, but you consider vulnerable populations and you are explaining, you know, an idea or concept, but you don't know yet what the project is you're going to lift out of that, then I would just say, you know, do your best to explain how you can meet low mod or meet slum blight, or how you would approach meeting it when you go to select your project. There are questions on how are you going to select your project. So one of your answers might be, in selecting the project, we will consider whether it will meet national objectives. In this way.
Okay. So this is a question about asking whether you can use CDBG NDR funds to prevent flooding to a most impacted and distressed area with unmet recovery needs, even if that infrastructure does not have unmet recovery needs.
It's conceivable. We're not doing pure resilience projects in most cases. But if you have been working on recovery in an area and to protect that recovery, you notice I am tying you back to the recovery, you want to make changes to infrastructure, you can make a pitch for that. But it's got to tie back. If you're making a case that without that resilience, your recovery from the past disaster is threatened, and then you can try proposing that. It's not the easiest path through here, but it is an allowable path. It's a path that's been taken through. It's a little more sophisticated. You really have to sit and think about how do you make tieback on a project like that. Where has your recovery been occurring or not occurring? It is, I can think of one project that we had in CDBG-DR in the past where an area that was in a floodplain and needed protection but didn't have it, couldn't recover because the insurance costs had shot through the roof. And so the businesses and homeowners just couldn't figure out a way to come back. Maybe we wouldn't be paying for the recovery itself, or maybe you've been using other funding for the recovery and you need to protect your recovery. You'd have to demonstrate the most impacted and distressed area, and then you're going to have to look at that unmet recovery need thing in Appendix G and really figure out how you demonstrate some unmet recovery needs. Environmental degradation is going to be a path for some of you, I know, and I would just take a real close look. without an unmet need, and resilience can be an unmet need. The NOFA says that explicitly. You're going to say that you can't complete your recovery. It can't be purely future-looking.
This is somewhat related to that, actually. If the state is spending money on the construction of sewer and aqueduct facilities, and the absence of such infrastructure is part of the resiliency problem in the community, could that money be considered as a match?
We're not doing match, remember. Everybody keeps going back to match. But we don't do match, we do leverage. So if that, to the extent that that sewer and aqueduct construction, to the extent that you are doing it resiliently to, for example, if you want to look in long-term commitment, are you building above an established standard? You could get points there. Whether you could consider it on leverage, it could probably be supporting leverage, which I think would give you half credit. In Phase 2. In Phase 1, we're really just looking for cash help on planning, and for you to answer the prompts in Phase 1 about, we're looking for leverage related to outcomes too. We want you to figure out early on, what do you want to actually achieve? What resilience are you trying to get to measurably?
Okay, another similar sort of project-specific question.
Yeah.
Can CDBG-DR funds be used to make a wastewater treatment system resilient in a most impacted and distressed area if that piece of infrastructure remains vulnerable to flooding from the qualifying disaster and to future flooding, even if it has already been built?
If it's already been built back and to an existing standard and you're done with the project, you're going to have a problem with unmet recovery needs.
Yeah. And that was the question she finished. I didn't read all the way down.
Yeah.
If it's been built back to pre-existing standards.
Yeah, not, well, and it would be, that's the hardest one to do. We actually have an FAQ on this. I mean, if you've already completed the build back, hardening it or making it more resilient is going to be difficult to justify. That's a more difficult variation on the question we just answered about how can you tie a pure resilient project back to protecting your recovery. That one is just a little harder because you're going to have a harder time finding data if the facility is already back.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not impossible. It's just difficult. I mean, it's going to take some real, like, case-specific thinking about it, and unfortunately, I can't coach you through that because of the HUD Reform Act. This is where I'd say, you know, read the NOFA carefully, brainstorm, and go talk to the Rockefeller Group and talk to your peers.
Okay, then the next question is that the FEMA disaster for this questioner affected their entire sewer system. Could any of these funds be used to help with local match or really leverage, I hope was what they actually meant, or to connect additional customers to the sewer system?
The declared disaster affected your sewer system. Can the funds help with FEMA match? I would guess. I mean, HUD funds CDBG funds can definitely be FEMA match for both PA and HMGP. All the CDBG regulars on the phone are shuddering about the tap-on fee question. It is possible to use CDBG to connect additional customers to a sewer system, particularly if you can show in disaster recovery that their wells failed, things like that. If you have that data, that's really good data. I know that when I used to work in North Carolina, the counties there would hustle out right after a disaster and test all the wells because they knew they'd all flunk after a flood, so they'd have the data. I don't know if other places do that. But Meg moved the question, so
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm losing track of where I was. But tap-on is normally done if you're on public property. You can do that part of the tap-on. If you're on private property, the individual homeowner property or business property, CDBG changes categories there. We think about that as rehabilitation. And tap-on alone is not normally allowed as an eligible activity. So if you decided to go that route, if you got invited to Phase 2, you might want to, you might have to have an eligibility waiver. But we'll take a better look at that and try to give a more complete answer based on some case stuff that we have and get that out on the FAQs. It's one of those repeating questions that we hear occasionally across the years. Now you can.
Okay. Phase 1 factors suggest that multiple most impacted and distressed urgent recovery needs can be identified in an application submission. Does this mean that 3 separate presidentially declared national disasters could all be used to identify the most impacted and distressed urgent recovery need area for this NDRC?
Sure. This question can go 2 ways. One is you have one place like Roundup, Montana, I think, that got 3 different disasters. They basically go for 1 a year, I think. So, yeah, you could use 3 different disasters and the effects of 3 different disasters to explain their most impacted and distressed unmet recovery need. Or it could be if you are a state that have scattered disasters, such as California, where the disasters didn't overlap at all, they're scattered around the state. And so you have 3 different disasters and you want to qualify 3 different areas based on 3 different sets of effects. And yes, you can do that. Both of them are yes.
Are revolving loan funds qualified for NDRC funding?
Yeah. CDBG has lists of eligibility categories that aren't like anything else in federal government. And we don't consider financing mechanisms to be, like loan funds, to be eligible activities. They're just ways of providing assistance. So anything you can think of, you can do a grant or a loan guarantee or a revolving loan fund, or it's not common for disaster recovery grantees to earn significant program income, but on the exact same chassis or very, very close to the same chassis doing real estate work, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program generated more than $1.3 billion in program income. So it is revolving funds are fair game. There's a lot of different financing mechanisms, and you know, whoever asked that needs to hunt down a CDBG practitioner and really dig through the possibilities. And I believe that takes care of all of the questions that we have in the Q&A box. Are there any questions on the phone, Kathy?
I'll defer to Brian. Brian, are there any questions on the phone?
And we have no questions via the phone line.
Ah.
So unless somebody sends, this your last chance.
Well, while they're doing that,
while
I'm
they're
going
doing that,
do 2 more slides. Why don't we have the extra slides? Let's go ahead and do them.
Okay.
Let's do the next pretty picture. It looks a lot like the last pretty picture. Stakeholder geography. You have stakeholders for your proposal. They were affected by the disaster or they're in adjacent areas. At a minimum, you're going to have to consult. This is beyond citizen participation for CDBG grantees and beyond the con plan requirements, and it's been rewritten a little. At a minimum, you must consult with stakeholders in your most impacted and distressed areas and adjacent areas. And if you're a unit of general local government, or as CDBG calls them, UGLUGs, you need to also consult with your state. But we'll give you points if you do consultation in a larger area, including a multi-county region, statewide, or in a multi-state region. And yes, we have had that question, can 2 states come in together? Or 3 states come in together? And the answer is yes. That's out in the FAQs. It's a little complicated, but it can be done because CDBG has the permission in the law. It's a constitutional thing. Let's go to the last one. The last pretty slide.
Kathy?
There she goes. Commitment geography. And here we're talking about the long-term commitment, without which you will not get invited to Phase 2. Once again, the minimum is you must make some kind of long-term commitment to resilience that measurably enhances resilience in the most impacted and distressed and unmet recovery need area, regardless of whether you get funded. But we'll give you more points if you reach further into adjacent areas, multi-county regional areas, state, or a multi-state region. And I should put tribes in here, but I was never really sure what level to put them at. But you'll also, reaching further includes reaching out to the tribes. So, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we had another question come in. Will the 20% planning and admin limit be held during the competition?
The Public Law 113-2 actually puts a 5% general administration cap on the grant. But it didn't talk about planning, so HUD has left the 20% cap standing. So it's a total for planning and administration per grant, not for subgrant, per grant. And but of that, only 5% of a grant may be used, or grant plus program income may be used for planning, for general administration. And so a lot of you are state. We generally adhere to the entitlement, because we're allowing you to act directly, we generally adhere to the entitlement definitions of planning administration for these purposes.
Okay, so we had a question about when and where the Rockefeller websites are or will be offered. Workshops.
We said websites.
Oh, workshops. I was just thinking, I don't think that those are, the workshops aren't scheduled yet, or the academies.
No, the academies aren't scheduled yet. November 18th is the summit, I believe, and invitations are going out very soon. We're looking for the summit, Rockefeller, it's not we, I shouldn't say that. Rockefeller is looking for the highest level decision makers that they can get from your communities to come. They're looking for 1 to 2 people to come for this summit, and there'll be very high level people. We've got some cabinet level people invited to talk to them at the summit and try to get people kind of fired up, and because we're looking for these big leverage and commitment factors. So that happens in November, and then January?
Yeah, January 2015, 5 regional resilience academies will be held, and those locations and agendas are still being worked on right now. And as for the November 18th summit, those invites have gone out already, and I know that they're registering for it. So,
Kathy, I was just thinking, just with that in mind, if you wouldn't mind passing control back to me, I can share the website and show where to find the information about the Rockefeller info on the browser.
Yeah, we get enough Rockefeller questions. And just remember, they're parallel to us, but separate.
So just going back to the main NDRC website on the HUD Exchange, down at the bottom you see the Rockefeller Foundation's Capacity Building Initiative for the NDRC. There's a FAQ document there, but if you click here to visit the actual page of the Rockefeller Foundation's effort, we should go there. Yeah. So this is where you would go to find more information about probably those academies and other resources that they're making available to the eligible applicants.
Yeah, and they're going to put some videos up, and they have reports and publications. They've been working in, resilience is one of their really big areas that Rockefeller works in. So it's definitely worth taking a look over here for resources.
And they do have a website, or I'm sorry, an email address. I don't know if they have it on the site here, that we can direct questions to, but it is...
Is it resilience@rockdown.org or something like that?
Yeah, resilience.academy.
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Probably if you click email, you will...
Yeah, go there.
Your browser or your email application will open. My browser is being very slow. There. Oh, send it. No, that's not what you want to do. That's for sharing. That's for sharing.
But we can get that up.
There it is, right there. Resilience with CE at
.academy@rockfound.org.
Yep, is their email address to forward or questions about the Resilience Academies or anything else.
And they're very interested in what experts you would like to have at the academies. If there's engineers or designers or, you know, if there's different kinds of experts that you would like to have at the academies to help you think better about resilience and stuff, they've been asking that question, and so you can send that to that email address also.
And just while you're here, this is the Office of Economic Resilience Resources, Community Resilience Resources page. It's got them sort of categorized in these 4 different buckets that then take you kind of further down into different types of, there's a whole lot of stuff in here, so it's just a great place to go.
Including the inspiration stuff is really fun. The Rebuild by Design videos on the right, the 100 Resilient Cities, some of those inspiration stuff are really fun when you're starting to think about this because it helps you think different. Okay.
All right, so
here we are back.
I have another question. Hold on. Will long-term commitments made before a NOFA release but after the qualifying disaster count towards points for that factor?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, they will. The start date for your long-term commitment is your qualified disaster event date in your FEMA declaration. The end of that date period for those of you that got ranges, my condolences, and that's the date. We say in the NOFA that we are going to especially consider or pay special consideration, I forget exactly how we worded it, to changes made after the date of the NOFA. But the real start date is your disaster event date.
And then we're back to the last question in the Q&A box. I think if we could go, Kathy, to that slide about where to find more resources that's in the webinar slides. I think it's right after the questions slide.
Yes, the more resources.
Or am I the presenter now? I can do it. I will do it now.
It's slide 7.
Where to get more information. So this has the links to the NDRC website that we just demonstrated, the resilience resources, the Rockefeller Foundation effort, and also the email address where you can send other questions, resilientrecovery@hud.gov. So all the folks on this webinar are monitoring that mailbox and responding as soon as we can.
Well, so right now we're averaging within 5.5 hours. I got a little slower. I was keeping it to 4, and a couple got away from me.
Jessie's an overachiever. So we are definitely trying to get back to you as soon as we can. These links will also be active in the slides that will be posted probably a day or 2 from now on the website resources, or sorry, the webinar series website that we also demonstrated a little earlier in this call. So you can go there, look for the slides in addition to the recording. There will be a recording posted of this webinar as well.
And we're giving you one last chance if you'd like to ask some questions. We're still here. We're hanging out. We got time. We're kind of excited about this thing, because it is big and complicated and, you know, a change in the way we do business. Any more?
Going once? Going twice?
Gavel down. Okay, Kathy, you want to take us out?
Yes, thank you all for joining us today, and like Jessie and Meg said, we will post the slides and the recording, the slides by tomorrow, likely the recording by early next week, as well as a transcript of today's presentation. And thank you, Jessie and Meg and Jennifer, for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.